James Morgan sat quietly at the head of the table, his hands folded in his lap. The room was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, yet a cold weight settled in his chest. It was Father's Day, a day meant to celebrate him, but tonight, the air was thick with tension he hadn't seen coming. His daughter Lisa raised her glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Happy Father's Day, Grandpa," she said, turning to her grandfather, Robert Johnson, who sat proudly in his leather chair at the opposite end of the table. "Here are the keys to your new car." The other family members applauded, but James felt his throat tighten. Lisa's gaze shifted toward him. "And James," she said sharply, "the mortgage on the house has to be paid by Sunday." Her words sliced through the festive mood like a knife. James looked at her, his eyes calm but hurt. Without a word, he pushed his chair back slowly, the scrape against the floor loud in the sudden silence. He stood, took a deep breath, and quietly gathered his coat and bag. He left a note on the kitchen counter, folded neatly, then walked out of the house, his footsteps steady but heavy. Outside, the cool night air hit his face, but it did little to clear the cloud of despair settling over him. His phone buzzed endlessly in his pocket, dozens of missed calls flashing on the screen. But James didn't answer. Not yet. That night, in a small, dimly lit motel room, James sat by the window, staring out into the dark. Memories of better days with his late wife Helen flooded his mind, the warmth of family dinners, the laughter that used to fill the house. He felt the sting of betrayal keenly, but also a simmering resolve. This wasn't the end of his story. Not by a long shot. The cheap motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and forgotten dreams. James Morgan sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the thin blanket barely offering warmth against the chill of loneliness. His phone lay silent on the cracked nightstand, untouched. The 92 missed calls from the previous morning still haunted the screen, but he refused to answer. Not yet. Not until he figured out what he wanted to say, if he ever wanted to say anything at all. Outside, distant sounds of traffic and muffled voices reminded him how disconnected he felt. The house he once called home was now just a place full of memories and bitter words. Lisa's cold reminder about the mortgage echoed in his ears, twisting like a knife. How had it come to this? A lifetime of sacrifices and hard work, reduced to a single sentence delivered like a verdict. James's thoughts drifted to Helen. Her gentle smile, the way she would calm his worries with just a touch. They had promised to grow old together, to share every milestone as a family. Now, that family was shattered. He clenched his fists, anger mixing with sorrow. His phone buzzed again. A new message appeared, from Emily. "James, I'm here. Whenever you're ready." Emily had been his friend for years, the one person who saw beyond his silence and pride. Without hesitation, James dialed her number. "James." Her voice was warm but cautious. "I heard what happened. It's over, Emily. Or maybe it's just beginning," he replied, voice low but steady. They talked for hours, memories and plans weaving between them. Emily reminded him that he wasn't alone, that he still had people who cared. And, perhaps most importantly, that he still had himself. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Lisa and David toasted their victory. They whispered and laughed, unaware that James was already moving in the shadows, quietly plotting the reckoning that would change everything. Because betrayal was just the beginning. Days turned into a week, and James Morgan became a ghost in his own life. He tried reaching out to Lisa and David multiple times. Calls went unanswered, texts ignored, doors firmly shut in his face. The house that once echoed with his presence was now a fortress of silence and rejection. Lisa had changed. The warm daughter he once knew was replaced by a sharp, cold woman who cared only about money and appearances. David, too, followed her lead, his laughter hollow and selfish. They flaunted the luxuries he had worked so hard to provide, oblivious to the man who made it all possible. James spent his days in a rented office space Emily helped him find, sifting through bills, bank statements, and emails. He was searching for cracks, weak points where his children's greed left them vulnerable. Every unpaid bill, every forgotten debt was a weapon waiting to be wielded. At night, he wandered the city streets, blending into the shadows, unnoticed and unseen. But inside, a fire burned, a fierce determination not to be erased, not to be forgotten. He began keeping a journal, writing down every insult, every betrayal, every painful memory. This was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming his dignity and teaching his children the true meaning of respect. Meanwhile, Lisa threw extravagant parties, posting photos on social media that flaunted her wealth. David bought expensive cars he couldn't afford, chasing empty thrills. But the foundation of their empire was shaky, built on lies and neglect. James knew that patience was his ally. The fall would be inevitable, and when it came, it would be thorough. The worn leather chair creaked beneath James Morgan as he sat in the dimly lit office of his longtime attorney, Mr. Henderson. The faint scent of aged paper and polished wood filled the room, a sharp contrast to the turmoil swirling inside James's mind. Across the desk lay a thick file stamped with the insignia of the Morgan family estate. James's fingers traced the edges, hesitating before opening it. This was more than just a collection of papers. It was the last thread tying him to a family that no longer wanted him. "I understand, James," Mr. Henderson began gently, his voice steady and reassuring. "It's not uncommon for wills to be challenged, especially when emotions run high. But there are provisions you can use to protect your interests." James nodded, absorbing every word. 4 years, he'd assumed the will was set in stone, a document written years ago, favoring Lisa and David equally. But life had changed. People had changed. And maybe, just maybe, the will could change too. "Is it possible to amend it now?" James asked quietly. "Technically, yes," Mr. Henderson replied, leaning forward. "As long as you're of sound mind, you can create a codicil, an amendment, to the will. It must be witnessed and notarized, but it allows you to redirect your assets as you see fit." A slow smile crept across James's face. Finally, a way to reclaim some control. "But be careful," the attorney warned. "If your children find out, they may fight it. Legal battles can be messy and drawn out." James's gaze hardened. Let them fight. It would only expose their greed further. After leaving the office, James walked through the city streets, the weight of possibility lifting his spirits. The very idea of reshaping his legacy, of denying his children their expected inheritance, was a balm to his wounded pride. He thought of Helen, her steady hand guiding him through life's storms. What would she say? Would she approve of this path? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing: he couldn't let himself be a victim anymore. That night, in the solitude of his motel room, James began drafting the codicil. Each word was chosen with precision, a quiet declaration of his new resolve. Meanwhile, Lisa and David's lives spun faster, deeper into reckless luxury. Parties grew wilder, debts piled higher. They laughed at the thought of their father's retreat, blind to the storm brewing quietly beneath the surface. James felt the first stirrings of victory. The forgotten will was no longer forgotten. James woke up before dawn, the weight of his decision heavy on his chest but a strange sense of calm settling within him. The quiet motel room, once a refuge of loneliness, now felt like the war room where he would orchestrate his comeback. The codicil was drafted, ready to be formalized, a final statement that would upend the expectations of his children and the family that had turned its back on him. But James knew that legal papers alone wouldn't be enough. The battle was bigger than the will. It was about reclaiming his dignity, exposing the truth, and forcing Lisa and David to face the consequences of their greed. His first step was subtle but deliberate. Through Emily, he connected with a trusted private investigator, someone skilled in digging up the kind of dirt that could unravel carefully constructed lies. James handed over what little he had: financial statements, social media profiles, overheard conversations. He wanted evidence, proof of debts, unpaid taxes, unethical deals, and extravagances funded by his own hard-earned money. Lisa's lavish parties, once a symbol of triumph, would soon become a facade cracking under pressure. David's reckless spending was already raising red flags with creditors, and James intended to make sure they felt the heat. Days passed as the investigator worked, feeding James bits of information that confirmed his suspicions. There were hidden loans Lisa had taken without telling anyone, late payments on credit cards, and even rumors of shady business partners ready to sue. David had a new car on a loan he couldn't possibly afford, and his credit rating was plummeting fast. Instead of confronting them directly, James chose patience. He made anonymous calls to Lisa's creditors, tipping them off about her missed payments and outstanding balances. Letters arrived, threatening legal action and demanding immediate repayment. The pressure began mounting quietly but relentlessly. At the same time, James cut off all financial support he had previously extended. Small payments that had kept the house running, bills covered in secret, were stopped. The mortgage reminder Lisa had cruelly delivered at dinner was no longer just a threat, it was a reality looming closer. In his motel room, James scribbled notes and charts, mapping out every detail. Revenge was no longer just a feeling, it was a plan unfolding with cold precision. Meanwhile, Lisa and David remained oblivious. Their world of parties, new cars, and designer clothes continued, but the first cracks began to show. Phone calls from collectors interrupted their celebrations, and whispers among their business circles hinted at instability. One evening, Lisa's phone rang incessantly during a dinner with her friends. She glanced at the screen, fury flashing in her eyes as she ignored another threatening message. David found himself arguing with his bank manager over a declined transaction, a situation that left him humiliated and confused. James, miles away, smiled quietly. The seeds of revenge had been planted, and the harvest would come soon enough. But beneath the satisfaction was a deeper, more complex emotion, one that even years of betrayal couldn't fully erase. James wondered, not for the first time, what might have been if his children had chosen love over greed, respect over disdain. That night, he closed his journal, the pages filled with plans and pain. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, James felt he was no longer the invisible man. He was a force to be reckoned with. The once gleaming mansion that Lisa and David called home now echoed with quiet tension, a stark contrast to the vibrant parties and laughter that had filled its walls just weeks before. The superficial glitter was starting to tarnish, revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Lisa paced the marble floor of the grand living room, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against the crystal glass she held. The stress lines around her eyes deepened as she read yet another email, this one from a creditor threatening legal action if payment wasn't made immediately. The carefully curated image of success she had built was beginning to crumble. "We can't keep dodging this forever," David said, his voice tight with frustration as he slumped into a leather chair nearby. His expensive suit did little to hide the exhaustion etched into his face. "If Dad wanted to hurt us, he's doing a damn good job." Lisa shot him a sharp look. "Don't say that. We'll figure something out." But even as the words left her lips, she knew it was a lie. The debts were piling up faster than they could handle, and the mysterious pressure that had suddenly descended on their lives was suffocating. Robert Johnson, the patriarch and Lisa's grandfather, watched them with growing disdain from his study. His sharp eyes missed nothing. The grandchildren he had once admired now appeared weak and vulnerable, their confident masks slipping away. He had always been proud of the Morgan name, but lately, that pride was being replaced by disappointment. He summoned Lisa one afternoon, his voice cold but measured. "You've been reckless, wasting what your father and I built. Do you think you can keep living like this without consequences?" Lisa clenched her jaw but said nothing. Robert's words stung, but beneath her defiance, fear gnawed at her. She wasn't prepared to face the ruin that seemed inevitable. Meanwhile, James watched from a distance, hidden behind the veil of anonymity. He wasn't there to gloat, his victory was quiet but powerful. The first cracks had appeared in the perfect facade his children had constructed. The same greed that once blinded them was now their undoing. Emily sat beside him one evening in the small apartment he had rented after the motel. "You're doing more than just surviving, James," she said softly. "You're reclaiming your life." He nodded, feeling the weight of the past months but also a flicker of hope. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt the tide turning. Back in the mansion, arguments grew more frequent. David lashed out in frustration, accusing Lisa of dragging them down. Lisa retorted with bitter sarcasm, blaming him for their failures. The siblings who once stood united were now fractured by fear and suspicion. Their social circle began to notice. Invitations stopped coming. Friends distanced themselves. The image of wealth and power they had projected was fading, replaced by whispers of financial ruin. James knew better than to strike too soon. Patience was his greatest weapon. The pressure would build, until the very foundation of their arrogance collapsed. That night, alone in his apartment, James opened his journal once more. He wrote not only of revenge but of the man he was becoming, the man who refused to be broken. The cracks in their facade were widening, and soon, the fall would be unstoppable. The glow of a single desk lamp illuminated the cluttered room where James Morgan sat, surrounded by stacks of old documents, photographs, and faded letters. Each piece told a story, stories of a family once bound by love and trust, now torn apart by greed and betrayal. Emily sat across from him, her eyes scanning a folder thick with papers she had uncovered after weeks of quiet investigation. "James, these aren't just bills or business contracts. These are secrets. Family secrets that Lisa and David would do anything to keep hidden." James took a deep breath, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. "Show me everything." What Emily revealed was more than just financial mismanagement. Buried in the archives were deeds to properties James didn't know existed, contracts signed without his consent, and evidence of shady deals Lisa had struck with dubious partners. Worse, there were letters, handwritten notes from Robert Johnson to Lisa, discussing plans to cut James out of the family legacy. "It's worse than I thought," James muttered, eyes scanning the yellowed pages. "They never intended to include me." Emily's voice was steady but resolute. "Now we have leverage. This can change everything." The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet preparation. James and Emily plotted how best to use the newfound information, not just to hurt Lisa and David, but to expose the corruption that had poisoned the family. They knew the path would be dangerous. These people played hard and were ruthless in protecting their interests. One evening, Emily pulled James aside after a meeting with a trusted journalist she had contacted. "We need to be smart about this," she said. "Leaks to the press will cause a scandal. It could ruin them socially and financially. But we must make sure everything is legally airtight. Otherwise, they'll find a way to silence us." James nodded, the old fire in his eyes burning brighter than it had in months. The quiet man who had once been discarded was now an unstoppable force, fueled by pain and a desire for justice. Meanwhile, Lisa and David remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just beyond their reach. They were wrapped up in their world of extravagance, new cars, lavish dinners, and social climbing. But behind their smiles lurked paranoia. Strange phone calls, whispers of investigations, and anonymous threats unsettled them. Lisa confronted David one night in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Something's wrong," she admitted. "I feel like we're being watched." David tried to laugh it off, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "Dad's done something. I can feel it." Unbeknownst to them, James was already steps ahead, laying out the pieces of a complex puzzle that would reveal the truth to the world. One afternoon, as James sat reviewing the documents, his phone rang. It was Robert Johnson, the cold patriarch and father-in-law, his voice sharp and unforgiving. "You're meddling in matters you don't understand, James," Robert warned. "Leave this alone, or you'll regret it." James smiled to himself, calm and unshaken. "I'm done being invisible, Robert. This time, the truth will come out." That night, James wrote in his journal, "Sometimes the greatest allies come when you least expect them. The truth is my weapon, and patience my shield." The battle was far from over, but for the first time, James felt the tide turning. The unexpected ally, the power of truth, was now firmly in his corner. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of James Morgan's small apartment, casting long shadows over the scattered papers and photographs that lay across the table. Today was the day the quiet storm he had been brewing for months would break into a raging tempest. The evidence that Emily had uncovered, the proof of deceit, greed, and manipulation, was about to be unleashed on the world. James stared at the folder in front of him, his fingers trembling slightly. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. About exposing the truth that his children and Robert Johnson had buried beneath layers of lies and luxury. His breath caught as he thought of the lives that would unravel once the truth came out, but he steeled himself. It had to be done. Emily arrived early, a determined glint in her eyes. "The journalist is ready," she said. "We've gone over everything. If this goes public, there's no turning back." James nodded. "Let's make sure it's airtight." The journalist, a seasoned investigator named Mark Reynolds, had been cautious but intrigued by the documents Emily had provided. Over the past week, he had corroborated the details, verified dates, cross-checked financial transactions, and interviewed sources close to Lisa and David. The story was explosive, evidence of embezzlement, hidden debts, and unethical deals that implicated not just Lisa and David, but their grandfather Robert as well. By noon, the article went live. The headline blazed across news sites: "Morgan Family Scandal. Secrets, Lies, and Betrayal Behind Closed Doors." The piece laid bare the greed and corruption festering beneath the family's polished exterior. The public was shocked. Social media erupted with outrage and disbelief. Lisa was the first to react. She locked herself in her bedroom, her phone ringing non-stop with calls from creditors, reporters, and friends. The carefully maintained image of success and sophistication crumbled as accusations piled up. David, too, was blindsided. Business partners distanced themselves, wary of being tainted by association. Robert Johnson, faced with the fallout, made a rare public statement denying any wrongdoing. But the damage was done. The Morgan name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now synonymous with scandal. Meanwhile, James watched from his apartment, a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow washing over him. The man who had been ignored, dismissed, and betrayed was now the one holding the reins. But victory felt hollow without Helen by his side to share it. Emily sat beside him, sensing his conflicted emotions. "You did what you had to do," she said gently. "This is justice, not revenge." James nodded, though he knew the road ahead would be even harder. Lisa and David wouldn't give up easily. They were desperate and dangerous now. As evening fell, James opened his journal and wrote, "Truth cuts deeper than any blade. Tonight, the mask falls, and the reckoning begins." The battle lines were drawn. The Morgan family's darkest secrets were no longer hidden, and the fight for justice was only beginning. David Morgan's world was unraveling faster than he could control. Just days after the explosive media coverage revealed the Morgan family scandal, his carefully built empire started to crumble. Business partners pulled out, sponsors backed away, and creditors called relentlessly. The calls didn't just stop at his phone, they invaded his life, his office, his every waking moment. The boardroom where David once held court was now a battlefield. The faces around the polished table were cold, their eyes sharp with suspicion and disappointment. "David, your recent financial decisions have put the company at serious risk," one executive said bluntly. "If we don't see immediate changes, we'll have no choice but to cut ties." David's jaw tightened. He clenched his fists but knew arguing wouldn't help. The evidence James had exposed was damning. He had spent recklessly, hidden debts, and burned bridges, all while living off the family name and his father's money. At home, the pressure was no less suffocating. Lisa, still reeling from her own public humiliation, lashed out. "You should have stopped this, David. You were supposed to protect the family, not drag us deeper into the mess." David's response was bitter. "And you think you're innocent? You're just as guilty as I am. We're both sinking, and Dad is the one holding the rope." His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and desperation. For the first time, he felt truly vulnerable. The once arrogant, untouchable man was now drowning in debt and shame. His lavish lifestyle was slipping through his fingers, replaced by calls from banks threatening foreclosure and lawsuits. One night, after a particularly humiliating meeting with investors, David found himself alone in his empty mansion. The silence was deafening. He sank into a worn leather chair and stared at the family portrait hanging on the wall, a reminder of what he had lost. Meanwhile, James watched quietly from afar. He felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sadness, and something resembling pity. David's downfall was painful to witness, but it was the natural consequence of the choices he had made. James wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning of the reckoning, and there were still battles ahead. As David grappled with his new reality, James prepared his next move, one that would shake the family to its core and bring the final pieces of his plan into place. The grand study in the Morgan mansion felt colder than usual as Robert Johnson sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the weight of family disappointment heavy in the air. He was a man accustomed to control, to commanding respect with a single look or word. But now, with his grandchildren's lives spiraling and his son-in-law James quietly orchestrating a storm, he felt an unfamiliar sting of unease. The door opened sharply. James Morgan stepped inside, calm and composed, but beneath that calm simmered years of pain and determination. Robert's eyes narrowed, a mixture of surprise and irritation crossing his weathered face. "James," Robert began, his voice low but cutting, "I didn't expect to see you here. Especially now." James took a measured step forward, setting a thick envelope on the desk. "I'm here because this family needs to face the truth, Robert. You and your grandchildren have made your choices. Now it's time to accept the consequences." Robert's gaze flicked to the envelope. "What is this?" "Evidence," James replied. "Documents, contracts, proof of deceit. The same ones I've shared with the media and my attorney. You thought you could silence me, push me out, but I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere." Robert's face hardened. "You think you're the one in control? You're a fool if you believe you can undo decades of family legacy." James smiled coldly. "Legacy built on lies isn't a legacy. It's a prison. And you're the warden." For a moment, the two men stood locked in a silent battle of wills. The tension was palpable, the weight of past grievances and unspoken regrets hanging heavy between them. Robert broke the silence, voice dripping with disdain. "You've lost your place in this family, James. Don't pretend otherwise. You're a broken man, grasping at straws." James shook his head. "I'm not broken. I'm stronger than ever. Because I've finally realized what matters: dignity, truth, and justice." He turned to leave but paused. "This isn't over, Robert. Not by a long shot." As the study door closed behind him, Robert sat back, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Meanwhile, James walked into the fading light outside, the weight of the confrontation settling but not crushing him. He had taken a stand, and that stand would echo through the coming days. Later that evening, James sat with Emily, recounting the encounter. "He thinks he's untouchable," James said quietly, "but even the mightiest fall." Emily nodded. "And when they do, everything changes." James opened his journal and wrote, "Power without honor is fragile. Today, a wall cracked. Tomorrow, it will crumble." The battle for the Morgan family legacy was far from over. But James had taken the first step toward reclaiming not just what was lost, but what was rightfully his. The room was filled with an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of papers and the distant hum of city life outside the tall windows. The Morgan family had gathered in the grand parlor, a place once vibrant with celebrations, now heavy with tension. At the center stood James Morgan, steady and resolute, holding a thick envelope that bore the weight of their fractured past. Lisa and David exchanged uneasy glances, their faces masks of false bravado. Robert Johnson sat stiffly in his high-backed chair, his expression unreadable. The air was thick with anticipation. None dared to speak first. James cleared his throat, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of finality. "I have something important to share with all of you." He paused, letting the silence stretch. This is the updated codicil to my will. A collective breath was held. Lisa's fingers twitched nervously, David's jaw clenched. Robert's eyes flickered with something between anger and disbelief. James unfolded the document carefully. After careful consideration, and due to the events of recent months, I have decided to make significant changes. Effective immediately, all assets, properties, and inheritances previously designated to Lisa and David will be redirected to charitable organizations. A stunned silence followed. Lisa's voice broke the quiet, sharp and incredulous. You can't be serious. After everything we've done, you just throw it all away. David's face reddened with rage. This is blackmail. You're punishing us for what? James interrupted gently but firmly. For betraying your own father. For valuing money over family. For turning your backs on me when I needed you most. Robert's voice cut through, cold and commanding. This will not stand. We'll challenge this legally. You have no right. James met Robert's gaze steadily. I have every right. This codicil is legally binding, witnessed, and notarized. The truth is on my side. The room erupted into chaos. Lisa's protests grew louder, tears and accusations flying. David paced restlessly, threatening legal action. Robert banged his fist on the table, demanding calm but failing to command it. James stood tall, his heart heavy but unyielding. This was not revenge for its own sake, but justice, a reclaiming of dignity and respect that had been denied for too long. As the shouting continued, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter, one written years ago by his late wife, Helen. Her words, filled with hope and love, had inspired him through the darkest times. He read aloud softly, "Family is more than blood or money. It's respect, loyalty, and kindness. If those are lost, then what remains?" The room quieted, the weight of Helen's words settling over them. In that moment, James knew the battle was far from over. Legal battles, broken relationships, and wounds that ran deep would take time to heal, if they ever did. But for the first time, the truth was undeniable. Later, as the family dispersed, James sat alone in the parlor, the evening light casting long shadows. He opened his journal and wrote, "Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest peace. I choose peace over bitterness. The future remains unwritten." Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place within these walls. For James Morgan, this was not the end but a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find hope amid the ruins. The atmosphere in the Morgan household had shifted dramatically. The once grand estate, a symbol of wealth and family pride, now felt like a fortress crumbling under its own weight. The news of James's will amendment had struck the family like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves that unsettled every corner of their lives. Lisa sat alone in the expansive master bedroom, the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her designer dress felt like a costume she no longer believed in. The text messages and calls from creditors had grown relentless, their threats becoming more aggressive by the day. The mansion's expensive furnishings were starting to feel like gilded cages, trapping her in a life she no longer controlled. Her phone buzzed with a new message from David, "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." She hesitated before replying, the strain between them palpable. Meanwhile, David paced the once lively corridors of his penthouse apartment, the weight of failure pressing down on him. His business ventures were collapsing, and his reputation was in tatters. He was haunted by the public scandal, the loss of trust from clients and friends, and the undeniable fact that his father's quiet war was winning. Desperation drove him to the edge. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he called James, his voice trembling. "Dad, please, let's find a way to fix this. We're sorry. We never meant to hurt you." James listened in silence, the years of pain flooding back. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but so did a deep sadness. "Sorry isn't enough, David," he said finally. "You had your chance. Now it's time to face the consequences." The next day, a letter arrived at the Morgan estate, formal notices of foreclosure on properties Lisa and David had claimed as their own. The bank was moving swiftly, and the media was already circling like vultures. Robert Johnson, once the unshakable patriarch, found himself isolated. The scandal had damaged his standing in the business world, and even his closest allies were distancing themselves. He confronted Lisa and David in a tense family meeting, his voice cold and sharp. "You've brought disgrace on this family. If you don't fix this, there will be nothing left." But Lisa and David were broken, their pride shattered. The weight of their choices pressed down on them, and for the first time, they truly understood the cost. James watched from afar, a complex storm of emotions raging within him. He had won the battle, but the war had taken its toll. The family he had once dreamed of was fractured beyond repair. That evening, James sat with Emily, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on their faces. "This victory, it's bittersweet," he admitted. "I wanted justice, but I never wanted to destroy them." Emily reached out, placing a comforting hand over his. "Sometimes justice and healing are separate paths. You did what you had to do." James nodded, opening his journal. "The final blow is never easy. But from the ashes, maybe something new can grow." As the night deepened, James looked out over the city, a man changed by loss, betrayal, and a quiet hope for redemption. The early morning sun spilled through the curtains of James Morgan's modest apartment, painting the worn walls with a soft golden hue. For the first time in months, there was a fragile sense of peace surrounding him. The battles with his family had left scars, but they had also sparked a new beginning. James rose quietly, the weight of recent events settling on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. The confrontation, the revelations, the losses, they had changed everything. Yet amid the ruins, he found a glimmer of hope. It was time to rebuild not just his life, but what remained of his fractured family. Emily awaited him in the small kitchen, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Her presence was a constant anchor, steady and unwavering. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, pouring a cup and handing it to him. James accepted it with a nod. "We fought hard, but maybe now it's time for something different. Forgiveness. Healing. If they're willing." Emily smiled, hope flickering in her eyes. "It won't be easy. But it's the only way forward." Determined to bridge the chasms that greed and pride had carved, James reached out to Lisa and David, not with threats or accusations, but with an open heart. He invited them to meet in a neutral place, a small cafe downtown, away from the trappings of their former lives. The meeting was tense at first. Lisa's eyes flickered with resentment, David's jaw clenched tightly. But beneath the surface, there was a shared ache, a yearning for connection despite the wounds. James spoke gently but firmly. "I don't want to relive the past, but I want us to find a way forward. For Helen, for the family we lost, for ourselves." Lisa's voice trembled. "It's hard to forgive, Dad. But maybe it's time." David nodded, the weight of regret clear in his eyes. "We've made mistakes. Big ones. But I want to try." Slowly, the ice began to thaw. Conversations that once spiraled into anger turned into tentative understanding. They talked about the pain, the betrayal, but also about the memories that still bound them. The laughter, the holidays, the moments before everything changed. Over the following weeks, James, Lisa, and David started attending family therapy sessions. It was difficult, raw, and often painful. Old wounds reopened, but each session peeled back layers of resentment, allowing trust to rebuild piece by piece. James also found solace in reconnecting with old friends and community groups. He volunteered, shared his story, and discovered that healing was a journey shared by many. Emily stood by his side throughout, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was light. One afternoon, James received a letter from Robert Johnson. The tone was less icy, tinged with grudging respect. Robert acknowledged the family's mistakes and expressed a willingness to reconcile, however imperfectly. James felt a cautious optimism. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time, he believed in the possibility of redemption. He penned a final entry in his journal: "From ashes rise new beginnings. Forgiveness is the seed. Love, the water. Together, they may heal even the deepest wounds." As the sun set, James looked toward the horizon, ready to embrace whatever the future held, not as a defeated man, but as one reborn. The chill of early autumn hung in the air as James Morgan stepped onto the porch of the old family home, an edifice of memories, joy, and pain. The house, weathered but sturdy, had seen better days. Once a symbol of unity and love, it now bore the marks of neglect and distance. Yet today, it was the stage for a tentative reunion, a chance to heal wounds and rebuild what had been broken. Inside, Lisa arrived first, her expression guarded but hopeful. David followed, his steps hesitant, the weight of their shared history pressing on their shoulders. James waited by the doorway, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Would this be the moment that changed everything? Or would old ghosts rise to shatter any fragile peace? They gathered around the worn dining table where so many celebrations had been held. The silence stretched, heavy but expectant, until James spoke softly: "I want to start fresh. Not just for us, but for Helen's memory, for the family we once were." Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It's been hard," she admitted. "But I want to try." David nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "We can't change the past, but maybe we can shape the future." Over the following weeks, the family worked to restore both the home and their relationships. Walls were repainted, broken windows fixed, and rooms cleaned, each act a symbol of their commitment to renewal. More importantly, they began to listen, to understand each other's pain and regrets. James and his children attended therapy sessions together, confronting difficult truths and learning forgiveness. They shared stories, laughter and tears, rediscovering the bonds that had been buried beneath years of anger. Emily remained a steady presence, supporting James and encouraging the family's progress. She helped organize community events, inviting neighbors and old friends to witness the transformation, not just of the house, but of a family reclaiming their strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the freshly painted porch, James stood with Lisa and David. They held hands, a simple but profound gesture of unity. James reflected on the journey, a path marked by betrayal and heartbreak, but also by courage and hope. The scars remained, but they were no longer chains. Instead, they were reminders of resilience. He wrote in his journal, "Rebuilding is never easy. It demands patience, humility, and love. But with every brick laid and every wound tended, we rise stronger." As night fell, the Morgan family sat together under the stars, embracing the promise of a new beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would walk it together, bound by lessons learned and a shared commitment to heal. The first light of dawn seeped gently through the curtains of James Morgan's bedroom, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. Outside, the world was waking up, birds chirping softly as the city stirred to life. Inside, James sat quietly at the edge of his bed, a leather-bound journal open in his hands. He traced the lines of the last entry, feeling the weight of the journey he had traveled, a journey marked by pain, betrayal, revenge, and finally, redemption. It had been a long road, filled with battles that tested his spirit and moments that challenged his very soul. But here, in this moment of quiet reflection, he found peace. The past months had transformed him. The man who once felt invisible and discarded was now someone who had reclaimed his dignity and reshaped his destiny. More importantly, he had begun to heal the fractured bonds with his children, Lisa and David. Though the scars of the past still lingered, the family had taken their first real steps toward forgiveness and understanding. Lisa was downstairs, preparing breakfast, her movements steady and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic woman she had been. David was in the garden, tending to the new flower beds they had planted together, a symbol of growth and renewal. James closed the journal, standing and stretching as a gentle smile crossed his face. He moved to the window, looking out over the city skyline, the rising sun painting the buildings in gold and pink. This was more than just a view, it was a reminder of hope, resilience, and the endless possibilities that awaited. Emily entered the room quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to James, her eyes reflecting the quiet pride she felt. "You've come so far," she said softly. "From broken to whole." James nodded, accepting the cup. It wasn't easy, but every step, every tear, every fight was worth it. They sat together in comfortable silence, savoring the moment. Later that day, the family gathered around the dining table, the same table where years of conflict had once erupted. Now, it was a place of warmth and connection. James raised his glass, his voice steady and filled with gratitude. "To new beginnings," he said. "To family, love, and the strength to forgive." Lisa and David lifted their glasses, their eyes shining with a mix of hope and humility. As they clinked their glasses, James felt a profound sense of closure and anticipation. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, strengthened by the lessons of their past. That evening, James wrote the final words in his journal. "Life is a journey of storms and sunshine. We cannot control the weather, but we can choose how we weather the storm. Today, I choose hope." The sun set over the city, a fiery blaze of reds and oranges, a fitting end to a chapter filled with trials and triumphs. And as the stars emerged in the velvet sky, James Morgan closed his eyes, ready to embrace whatever the new dawn would bring. Thank you for spending this time with us. If the story moved you, even a little, let us know. Drop a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Your support means more than you know.